Welcome to One Sharp Sword, cutting through to what matters most. I'm your influencer, your host, Dr. Wayne Pernell, Dr. P. We're doing something a little bit different, a little fun today, and that is I have a guest with me. You may not have heard his name before, but I'm certain that you've heard of at least some of his accomplishments. He's a serious disruptor. He teaches disruption and innovation at Hult University. He's an adjunct professor at Cal Berkeley and can also be found at USF. He's a global consultant for companies facing growth and scaling issues, and he's an author of two amazing books that we'll talk about a little bit later. Without spilling it all, I'd like to introduce the founder of The North Face, Hap Klopp.
Wayne.
Hey, Hap, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so excited. I'm so excited that you're here. In terms of one sharp sword, cutting through to what matters most, you're all about making a difference. Talk to me a little bit about to whom you're making that difference and how you're doing it now.
Well, there's a presumption in there that I am making it. I'm trying to make it. Let's count on that as a way to go.
Sure.
I'm trying to make it everywhere. I try to make it inside the businesses that I built or I consult. I try to make it in the marketplace. I mean, I do things sort of passion outside of the actual workplace. I'm putting together a course that starts in a week at the Pacific School of Religion, adjacent to the University of California. And the title is Reclaiming Democracy, Civility or Outrage. So that's kind of the extreme from sort of banal of developing a company that makes a difference, that has a different strategy, different idea, to trying to do something for society. But simply put, when I started my business career, and even today, I see the same thing. I was disgruntled with what I saw. A lot of things didn't connect with my own personal values, and I didn't understand why. I started the North Face at the time the Vietnam War existed, and that's when the Vietnam War movement, the free speech movement, many of those things evolved. And I just believed that business had a role and an obligation to be able to make a difference, and that it could. And that was what I set off accomplishing.
That's amazing, truly. The notes that I have, I was going to ask you about innovation. I mean, back in the 1960s is when you started the North Face.
Yep.
And I was thinking it would be that you had this keen eye on innovation and you saw a way of stepping in, and what you said about values is everything. I think it's everything. And so can you talk about how that blended for you back in the 60s and what you've carried forward from there?
Well, you have to understand I'm located in Berkeley. I actually located here because it connected with what I was doing. It was a wonderful place to start a company in the outdoor business. But in addition to that, it's a city of dreamers and people who maybe are do-gooders to a certain degree, and maybe Pollyanna to a certain degree, and I fall in that camp. But what happened was when I was setting out, I had run a family business because my father died, and when I was in school, I sold that business. Lengthy story, so I won't bore you with it. But the reality was, I then wanted to go out and do something of my own. Nobody offered me a job. So I looked at working with large companies, and I found I didn't connect. I didn't believe in planned obsolescence. I didn't believe in paying women half of what men were paid. I didn't understand why there would be discrimination against people because of their sexual preference or because of their language. And I saw that everywhere I went. And as a result, after some interesting interviews, which I write about in some of my books, I concluded that I couldn't work for anybody else. And if not, what I had to do was launch a business of my own.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I knew a little bit about the outdoors because that's what you do when you're raised in Spokane, Washington, where I was raised. And so because I thought I knew what made a good product, I decided I'd construct a company around those things, always imagining building a brand, because I'm a big believer in building a brand. And the way I build a brand is what we did at North Face. Chose 3 words that were the linchpin of what we did. And those words had to apply across time and across every aspect of our company. And the three words were quality, disruption, and triple bottom line. And by triple bottom line, I mean people, planet, profits.
I love that. It's so powerful, right? Because you can filter everything through quality. You can filter everything through disruption to a greater or lesser degree. And I will want you to talk a little bit about what that means to you.
Mhm.
And then your triple bottom line is another triple filter of people, planet, profit. So talk about, how did you know that it was disruptive? And then talk a little bit about your triple bottom line, because I think that's where uh, my starts with one movement, for example,
Right.
the we need to rehumanize people one person at a time. We need to actually see people, and it doesn't mean to the exclusion of our planet or to the exclusion of being profitable. And so I would love to know about disruption, and I'd love to know more about your triple bottom line.
Well, disruption initially, people focused on product. We took materials from the Vietnam War, which is a little ironic because we were sort of fighting there. We took aircraft aluminum and made tent poles and pack frames. We took parachute cloth and we made sleeping bags and tents and some funky clothing. And what we did is lighten the load that people carried by about 50% in camping. And suddenly that lighter thing became an industry, which was backpacking. And then we kept revolutionizing by bringing in new materials, new concepts. When Gore-Tex came out, it allowed us to move into skiing. Our tent sales slowed down. I went to a friend of mine, philosopher genius by the name of Bucky Fuller, and he's the one that came up with the concepts of geodesic domes, tensegrity,
Yes.
entire math, and whatever. And I went to Bucky and I said, Bucky, you say geodesic domes encompass a maximum amount of space with a minimum amount of materials. Sounds to me like that could be a backpacking tent. And he said, oh, for sure, it could be. I said, would you design one for us? And he responded, he said, well, I'd love to, but I'm spending most of my time changing the world. And so I don't have time really to do that. But if you put a team together, I'll mentor the team. And we did, because we had a lot of people in Berkeley, a couple at our company that just loved Bucky. And so we worked together and revolutionized. So in theory, that was the disruption. But our disruption was also in our business model. We were omni-channel from day one. We sold by catalog, we sold wholesale, we sold in our own stores. That was heresy when we did it. Now it's commonplace, but it was there. And we followed through in those various ways. So we were constantly disrupting. You say, how do you know disruption is out there? I mean, first of all, there's an accelerating pace of change that happens. And if you aren't disrupted, you will be in the not too distant future. Certainly, in the day we're looking at right now, there are three things that are going to disrupt everybody, and you can look at your business and see if it's applied. The first one is digitization, the second one is democratization, and the third one is globalization. And those are the ones. But going back to the North Face days, what we were looking at an industry that had been around for years with millions of participants. And I knew, because I was part of it, that people were dissatisfied with what they were getting. We also coupled that with some philosophy. Thoreau was the one who said, in wilderness is the preservation of earth. We believed that. And we believed if we could take people to the wilderness, they would come back and they would be better stewards of the planet and also better stewards of their life. And the reality, as I said, we're Berkeley people, so we saw that. We also saw it was a time in which one individual was making a difference. Man first went to the moon, one person went to the moon. At the same time, Mario Savio was standing on cars and was able to rally people around to stop the Vietnam War. So we believed what one person could do. We believed we could do it through business because that was a skill I had. And we thought that this idea of the outdoors was really good. We realized that was disruptive. I mean, it was really disruptive because we were at the epicenter of the anti-war movement. There were days when we had to close our factory because cars were going by with the all of the guns outside that the police had, and that they were doing things. But the reality is, what we realized is that people were upset with the urban setting and what was happening there, and that we had a way, we believed, to improve on that by facilitating people going to the wilderness. So that was a general disruption coupled with a specific product disruption we went after. Now, from triple bottom line, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't like what I saw at all these big companies. So we came up with novel ways of running our business. And we believed in the environment. I mean, the simple way, if you talked about it to people on outsiders like investors, you say, well, if we don't protect the wilderness, there's no place for our people to go. But that was a pretty simplistic way of looking at it. What we believed is sustainability was a great way to go. So what we did was, once again, disruptive, but we came up with a total lifetime warranty on our product. And that was revolutionary. The bean counters, needless to say, thought we were crazy, and we weren't. Never was more than 1.5% of our sales. Best marketing tool we ever had. It was a way to get our whole community together around what we were doing, but it was also the most sustainable product. If you never put a product in landfill, it's even better than making it out of recycled materials. And
Wow.
I'm still hold to that today.
Wow. Wow. Yes. What about people? Talk about people a little bit.
Well, first of all, we had inclusive policies. We ended up speaking 14 languages or dialects at all time in our operation, so we could hire anybody. It made it difficult to do inspiring speeches when they were being, consecutively translated. But skipping that, we were able to hire people when they came in. A lot of immigrants came in and liked it, and they could get a well-paying job right away. Additionally, we had concepts, which we did. As I said, we wanted to pay women the same as men, so we did. Heresy, but that allowed us to get the best people. We had, gay and lesbian, transgender, all work for us because, interestingly enough, we became, one of the employers that they were touting. We didn't have to worry about hiring people. They said, this is a great place to work. So when everybody's out there and worried about using HR programs or whatever, we had people lined up to work for us. So we did that, and we constantly involved everybody in what we were doing. And when I hired the people that started the company, none of them had business training. I was looking for a specific thing in them: passion about the wilderness and the outdoors, if you will, and passion about saving the world, because we thought we were doing that. And if I felt that with my business experience, I have an MBA from Stanford, that training, I thought I could train them and that would be there. Well, must have trained enough people there, because these are all brilliant people, but just no business training. But they went on to basically run 11 other major companies in the outdoors. We had people that started Mountain Hardware. We had people that ran Birkenstock. We had people that ran Patagonia International that came from our team. We had Missy Parks started Title IX, which is a women's competitive sport line, and on and on. So the idea was to include them and educate them as we went forward. As we're educating, every 2 years, we would come back to discussing what we call our long-range plan. But most companies do long-range planning, but it's all quantitative and setting up their KPIs, as they call it, or whatever. But that was only part of what we did. Of course, we did that. But the other part was educating people about business and how to grow it, and also coming back to what our philosophies were in terms of what was our brand about, what was the DNA of the brand. And that's where we would talk about things like triple bottom line as a way to go forward.
Amazing. Truly amazing. You said some things that are just like, I don't know. There are times the questions come up. If you could go to lunch with anybody, who would you go to lunch with? And on my list has always been Bucky Fuller, Buckminster Fuller. I saw him speak years ago, and it would be like, I just would love to hang out. He's since passed, obviously, but wow, so you've had that experience. And then to bring forward the values, just pure people values, recognizing that it's about people, right?
Yeah.
That running a company is people.
And it's about how you deal with people and how you deal with what your values are. Just to carry on with the Bucky Fuller thing, Bucky helped us design the geodesic tent. It revolutionized tent design because freestanding and setup, and it was stronger as it got larger. Other people ended up making freestanding tents, but it basically was a harbinger of what happened out there. But we had a decision to make once we were finished with that, and that was, do we patent the product or not? And we chose not to patent the product. And we chose not to for two reasons. One was Bucky had never patented the work around geodesics because he wanted the world to have those. And we felt it was at best disingenuous and at worst probably ripping off somebody if we would patent a derivative of his work. Secondly, he and we felt that what we were doing was designing a product which could be replicated around the world and solve the world's homeless problem. Because you can
Amazing.
take the same design and use indigenous materials. You can use bamboo in some places. You could use thatched huts to be able to do that, but you could have that structure. And so if we patent it, we would inhibit that ever being done. Now, frankly, not many people have picked up on it, but that was our thinking that we did that. But again, it comes back a little bit to how you deal with people and what your goals are and how they get insinuated into your business.
This is exactly the focus that I'm looking for when we talk about one sharp sword and cutting through to what matters most, blending that with the starts with one movement, your ability to focus on an individual as well as think so globally. If we patent this, we are taking this away from a global thought, the ability to implement. And so you didn't, which is amazing. And the other piece that I'm getting, Hap, is that there's a spirit of generosity also, that the people who started with the North Face go on and become creators at Birkenstock, creators at Patagonia, right? So it's not they're in competition with, it's that we have this abundant universe and that everybody can share. We build on each other. That's the sense I'm getting.
But you're very accurate there. There was an article I read in the Harvard Business Review, and it was one of those, it wasn't very Harvard's Business Review type. It was much more pragmatic, but maybe that's why I remember it. It was written by a professor at Stanford, and he was talking about the difference between the pie slicers and the pie enlargers. And what he was meaning by the pie slicers is the Malthusian thinking that the goods, the results are in the availability is finite. And in the case of business, that there's a limited size that you have, so that anything that I get, I have to take from you, or conversely, anything you get, you have to take from me. The pie enlargers are those who believe with creativity and innovation, we're able to make the pie larger and there's enough for everybody. We, and frankly, the industry we chose to be in was one filled with people who were pie enlargers. So we didn't worry so much about competition. In fact, there was a slogan which I picked up, and I had my daughter put it in calligraphy, and we put it on the wall of our design department. And it came from the Mary Gloucester, Rudyard Kipling's writing. And it went something like, they copied all they could copy, but they couldn't copy our minds. So we left them sweating and stealing a year and a half behind. And it was the humor that we had, but it was also our meaning that we weren't as worried about people knocking us off or competing as we were about were we really testing ourselves from a design and innovation standpoint.
And that's the spirit of innovation. Are we continuing to test ourselves, Can you talk a little bit about, you've got two books out there. One, it focuses on success. One focuses on, surprisingly, the flip side of that, failure. And both are necessary for growth. One is called Conquering the North Face. The other, I love this title, is called Almost. And
you got to figure which one talks about failure, which one talks about success.
Almost. Yeah, I love both concepts and how they're tied to you test yourself. Can you talk a little bit about what readers might glean from each of those?
Well, the books are written in storytelling, because I believe in parables, and storytelling is a way to convey ideas more than memorizing the 7 points or the 14 this or whatever. They're easier to apply. Frankly, it can be easier to read. It's only later you reflect on what those are. So that's my style, and that's what I was trying to do. In the case of Conquering the North Face, I was talking about many stories from the out of doors, many stories from our company, many stories of what I'd done that were interesting, that added up to techniques you could use for leadership if you chose to, or you could read it just because it was entertaining, highs and lows and whatever, about how you overcome problems that you face in society. But when I finished with that one, I got involved. I was consulting with some companies, and I was brought into a company that should have been successful in Silicon Valley. It was based on portable power that would go into any of the consumer devices. Initially, we were putting heat and charging inside clothing, and it was big, but it had also a whole bunch of new patents and new ideas, and the company got hijacked by many reasons, and that's what the book is about. The story is 12 months inside this company, and by a company that had some of the graduates of the best schools around, the Naval Academy, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, had a couple astronauts involved, had millions of dollars raised. It had a CEO who'd been an admiral in the Navy, but it failed. And the stories about the failure. I joke, OPM, learn on other people's money. That's what you can do if you read the book. But what I felt was to succeed in today's world, and you see it in Silicon Valley, you have to be able to set your goals high enough that you have the risk of failure. The reason that half of the unicorns in the world are in Silicon Valley is because of the environment in which failure is not the end of your career.
Can I just underscore that for a second? That
Sure.
is one of the key takeaways that I want the One Sharp Sword audience to get is exactly what you just said. That's like such a gem. You have to set your goals high enough that you can risk failure. I love that.
And if you do, you'll be surprised how often you break through on new ideas. It was Edison, I think, who said, I've never failed. I've just found 10,000 ways something doesn't work.
Right.
And the easiest way not to fail, of course, is to set up such modest objectives that anybody could accomplish it. But that is not a very inspiring environment to work in. There's also one that doesn't lead to the novelty. And as you look at Silicon Valley and being in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley's always influenced the way we think. To be here, it's where people say, since it's okay to fail, I can do a moonshoot. I can set goals that even I can't imagine hitting, but I just know I will if I go after them. And some people reach them, some people don't. Many people have failed here. People that you think of highly successful have actually failed. Steve Jobs was kicked out of Apple. They brought him back, but he was kicked out. Couldn't play well with others. Mark Andreessen, who started Netscape, they asked him to leave. He now runs one of the biggest venture capital companies in the world. And you go on and on. There are tens of thousands of those stories globally, I'm sure, but there's certainly hundreds of them in the Bay Area, and it's not the end of their career. They could be financed. They could come up with even bigger ideas. So try to encourage it. It's kind of the type of thinking which I try to instill whether I'm consulting with a company or writing my books. And people can read my books, and I believe they're entertaining. I've been told that it was entertaining to write them, but there's a meaning. There's tools if you want to apply them. If you don't want to apply them, you can just say, oh my gosh. But and I must say that when I went to publishers with the book on failure, it was a hard sell because they said, look at the stores that are selling books and how many racks do they have for success stories and how many racks do they have for failures? And I said, well, not very many for failures, but they in themselves are failing. So maybe there's a reason.
Right. Right. I have this image of an inspirational leader standing on top of a mountain yelling, "Today we're going to be the most adequate."
Yeah.
No.
No.
Today we're shooting high and we risk it. And that is innovation. That's awesome. I'm going to have the links to your books on Amazon. I'll link in the show notes for our audience. What other key lessons? It's such a good, solid thing to be keeping in mind is you've got to shoot high and risk failure. what other key lessons might you have to help any one of us, at whatever level we're at, senior leader down to just starting out or just thinking about what direction, any key lessons you could give someone to just help get through the day?
Sure. I mean, the first one I've already touched on, and that is you have to have passion for what you do. You have to humanize what you're working on, because it's people who buy products, it's people who make products or services, all the same. It's people who are your team, and you won't get there if it isn't human. And one of the easiest ways to communicate with people is your passion. It's been said to speakers many times, but people only remember about a third of what you say. But what they remember is how committed you were to what you're doing. I believe it was Maya Angelou who talked about, they won't remember what you did, but they'll remember how they felt. It's the same thing in business, that you need that. And if you want to lead somebody, they want to know how committed you are to that. So one, put your passion into it. Don't be dispassionate. And second of all, put passion into the way you market
Amazing.
it. A second thing I see it in virtually every company that I've done consulting with, every company I've been involved with, deselect. There's always too many opportunities. To be successful, what you have to do is laser-like focus on the vital. And that doesn't mean that you won't get to those. You can down the future, but you can't do them all at once. You can't boil the ocean. It was Steve Jobs that was asked, when you came back to Apple, how did you come up with, the iPod, and you come up with these other ideas? And he said, listen, they were all in development when Scully was running the company. He said, what I noticed was they were doing so many things, they couldn't do any of them great. And so what I did was choose those. And he said, I very well may have left some ideas out that would have been equally as impactful as what we came up with. But what I knew is we couldn't do them all. And that's what I see in companies where I go around, that you have to do it. Maybe a third point is, what you have to have is good execution. That means simplify and whatever. Execution almost always trumps strategy and planning. And strategy and planning you should have, and you should have the ability to do it. But the world comes at you in strange ways, and you have to pivot quickly based on what you find, and you have to change things. And you have to have something. If you're only one person, maybe you can have the most complex thing in the world and manage it. But as soon as you start putting a team of people together, complexity really is difficult. I joke about the fact that large companies get major problems, then they bring in McKinsey or Accenture or Bain, these brilliant young people out of school with IQs that just never stop and whatever. And they come up with solutions to problems that are so elegant in their complexity, so three-dimensional, that the only possible people who could manage it are themselves. No company is staffed with those same type of people. It's like lifelong employment.
Sure.
And then
Sure.
one last thing that I've learned, and that is how you motivate people. And it's very simple. It's hire motivated people. There's no false camaraderie, no patting on the back, no pay scheme that you can impose, that over a long period of time is going to take people who are not motivated and change the way they are. What motivates them is their inherent characteristic. And so as you look to employ somebody, I really would urge everybody to look at the motivation they have. And it may not be motivation at the outset regarding your business or your slice, but if they're not motivated by anything in life, whether it's music or food or family or whatever, you're probably not going to get them motivated in your company, no matter what you're doing.
Love that. All right. So I'm going to bounce back to a couple things you said. I love that. One sharp sword is about cutting through to what matters most. And so really the idea of cutting through, right? There's so many options. There's so many things. How do you find that thing and stay laser focused on it? And that's basically it's you cut away and just pick one, right?
Yeah.
It's pick one. The other thing about one sharp sword that matches some of the things that you were talking about is you can have 1,000 dull blades. One sharp sword is all you need. execute, right? Let's do it. Let's get in, let's do this thing. And then if we need to pivot because there's another battle to be fought or another place we need to focus, again, but not 1,000 dull blades, one sharp sword to cut through. um, and then the last thing you said was hire based on motivation. And for me, when I do my consulting, uh, I want to make sure that the values of the company are out front.
Mhm.
And that way, when you're hiring, the filter is, what did you notice about these values that made you want to come here? And
Yeah.
that's the biggest filter is, are the people that are lining up there for, well, it's a paycheck and they could get that anywhere, because
Right.
that's not real motivation.
No.
Or it's, I want to be a part of something.
Motivation the day may be that they come there.
Sure.
Day 2, it diminishes, and by day 20, it's totally a non-issue.
Evaporated. Exactly. And so, right, can I align, right? I want to have alignment. And so the companies that I work with, and I'm certain the companies you've consulted with as well, it's all about alignment of those values and
Totally agree.
right? Communication from the leadership about what the values are.
But as people would guess with the North Face, I'm a very big believer in branding, and some of the consulting I do is regarding branding. But
Sure.
branding is not a marketing aspect. Branding is not a one-time activity. Branding is not a logo. Branding is not a tagline. All those things you add in. What branding is about is understanding your DNA and applying that DNA across what you're doing. So every touch point with a marketplace is consistent, persistent, and consistent. So when I talk about the 3 words of disruption and quality, triple bottom line, we would constantly, every 2 years in our long range planning, come back to that to talk about what the company stood for. Because if you build consistently, that becomes your brand, and people understand that in the marketplace. And it means you articulate it at every point, not just in your marketing department, but it's in your HR practices, or it ends up being in the way finance, or in the vendors you select, or the customers that you go after. You don't have to chase every customer, because those people become a community that really are strong and with you. So again, it requires one knowing what that is and then articulating it. But it's not just articulating it through your marketing materials or a new ad campaign.
Love it. So many gems, so much gold in this conversation, Hap. Thank you. What's next for you?
Well, working on a variety of things. I'm sit on some boards. As long as they're disruptive, it's interesting. I'm involved with a nanoparticles company that applies nanoparticles to fibers or fabrics or laminates to change the functional properties. I'm involved with a company which is into health and wellness. It basically runs IV drip therapy clinics, 80 of them around the globe, but also is doing DNA analysis for its clients. And those DNA analysis can be used for democratized healthcare. So that what you can do is proactively, as opposed to reactively going to a doctor when you're ill, you can actually adjust your diet or your pharma based on your DNA, and you'll be able to develop that. So we're working with those, and so those are a couple of things I'm pretty passionate about. And of course, as I said, I'm teaching a course, and a course is on society. It's about reclaiming democracy, civility versus outrage. I'm passionate about that. I'm not quite sure what the answer is going to be, but I want to encourage a dialogue, because I think we're in times of paralysis, and it is a paralysis that's not working to anybody's benefit. And I think if we can create a dialogue and figure what it is to move us from the status quo, move us from the stasis that we're in, it'll be beneficial.
Oh my gosh. That's truly amazing. I am so honored, and I know my audience is going to be just thrilled to have listened to this, to have been exposed to you. And thank you so much, Hap Klopp.
Kind of you to say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.